welcome to the AppSec Insiders Podcast. I'm Iman, and
I'm Farshad.
And I'm
we are,
Zohaib.
we are your hosts of this episode of AppSec Insiders. Joining us today, we have our guest Zohaib. Welcome. Please introduce yourself to the audience.
Hi, everyone. My name is Zohaib Khawaja. I'm part of AWS Partner Solutions Architecture team, specifically on the Scale PSA team, as shown here. I work as the Partner Solutions Architect for Forward Security. I think we've been working together for about 5 to 6 months now. We've been having some good progress, and I'm looking forward to talking about some security points and other security related issues and concerns and recent developments on the AWS side of things and how Forward Security has been working with us.
Awesome, awesome. As always, this is a show where we explore the ever evolving and intriguing world of application and cloud security. Before we get into today's discussion, there are a few housekeeping items. October is a cybersecurity awareness month, and make sure you do your part to keep everything secure. Also, OS Vancouver, we have a session that Jivan, our speaker, he wants to talk about security tools optimization on October 17th. Also, our very own Farshad is gonna have a talk in Austin, Texas, in LastCon conference, and it's about CI/CD pipeline security, CI/CD's pipeline security, and lastly, if you're not already subscribed, please consider subscribing and sharing with anyone who you think may enjoy listening. That would mean a lot to us. And I'm gonna start with my first question. How does AWS Cognito's implementation of JSON Web Tokens for authentication impact application security, and what best practices should developers follow when working with these tokens?
Okay. So I think probably the best way to say for JWT is Cognito uses JWT specifically for token-based authentication. So each token is signed, making sure the token can't be tampered with or duplicated once issued. And in general, this is meant to enhance trust and integrity in authentication systems. This is meant to be supplemented with other best practices like rotating keys. That should always be a best practice. Using HTTPS for preventing any token interception and making sure that each token is only assigned for the amount of time it's needed. So ensuring that it's short-lived and not available for too long. I'll pass it over to Farshad to see how Forward Security, or actually probably not with JWT in particular, but I am actually kind of curious in regards to token-based authentication. What are some security best practices that Forward Security implements?
With token based authentication, one of the important things is to make sure that you actually check and see you are using a key to sign the token, whether it's a symmetric key or asymmetric key, you should be using one. I've seen clients that they said they thought that they were using signed tokens, but when we did a code audit, it was like they had left that field empty where they specified what type of encryption algorithm and key that they should use. So if you leave it out, then it's going to not sign anything. So that's really important. But also, when you select the algorithm, make sure you're selecting secure algorithms, right? Like RS-256. The other thing is that the token expiry. We see a lot of people create tokens that last a long time, days, 24 hours. That's not appropriate. So the idea is that when, yes, you're building a stateless application, and that's reducing the need to have that, traditional server-side session management, but you still should look at using refresh tokens, and those are the ones that last a long time, and they're used to acquire further access tokens, and really thinking hard about the length of the expiry for the access and jaw tokens and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, those are some of the issues
Awesome.
we really see out there.
Awesome. Also, I can add more. Like we should implement the token revocation strategy. One of the issues is that, if we don't, if someone or if an attacker, they steal the token, or if a jaw token is stolen, an attacker can use it until it expires. And that is one thing. The other thing is that I believe we should store tokens securely using HTTP only cookies for web applications. And we should never store any sensitive information in jaw tokens. Awesome. Let's go for my next question. And Zohaib, Can you discuss the security implication? Sorry, can you discuss the security implications of using Cognito user pools versus identity pools, particularly in scenarios involving third-party authentication providers?
Absolutely. I would say the first, I'll say three things, the main implications. With user pools, you would control the security policies directly. Identity pools generally require very careful IAM policy configuration to ensure least privilege access. And involving third-party authentication providers, I'd say that requires extra scrutiny, in particular to handling token validation. So, for let's say for security implications, if you wanted to use Cognito user pools, you would generally control those security policies directly. So whenever a third party wants to, let's say if it's a service integrator, a third party needs access to a specific AWS environment, you would use user pools to make sure that as a user is authenticating in, they would have only the strict amount of access that's needed. However, if you're assigning an IAM policy, or excuse me, you're putting them into identity pool in IAM, then it's a similar outcome, but a different method of doing it. In both cases, similar, make sure it's the least privilege access, but just different ways of doing it. It's two different routes to get to the same least privilege access destination, but definitely different ways to do both.
It's interesting. So I have a question because I was, I've always tried to wrap my heads around it because one is called user pools, the other one's called identity pools, right? What's the best way to think about the difference between them? What's a simple way for the audience to think that how they can remember what the difference is?
The user pool is essentially for, let's say, authentication to an entity that you know is going to continuously log in, obviously mostly a human user. Either a role or identity would be, it may not be a human that needs continuous re-authentication over time. So if someone needs a server to be given access so that I'll use an actual example, a license server. If someone's hosting a SaaS application in a customer's environment, that license server will need to have some permissions. So they would have an identity and given machine level access temporarily, and then that would be spun down once that license server is connected to. Whereas if you get a new hire and that person needs to be given a role added to the user pool because they're going to need to re-authenticate over time.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you. Good way to describe that. It makes it definitely simpler to look at.
Awesome. What are some security implications when we use identity pool? Like
security implications.
yeah. For example, I believe we should it requires careful configuration of IAM roles to prevent overprivileged access. Am I right? Like
Yes.
one of the points. Okay.
Yes. When I'm not going to say it's the most common, but definitely a common concern is definitely whenever you have a machine being given access to an environment through identity pool, are we giving this machine too much information? It's not a human that would realize this is a machine that would take advantage of the permissions that it's given. So for security implications, I would say there is much higher scrutiny on identity pools since it's typically given to things that can operate in the milliseconds as opposed to me clicking and dragging my mouse around. That's the main security implication, I'd say.
I see. Awesome. Next question is, what are some common misconfiguration in AWS Cognito that could lead to security vulnerabilities? And how can organizations audit their Cognito setup to identify these issues?
It's the same, I'll be very honest, it's the same misconfigurations since the introduction of group policy. I think that was in 1994. It's the exact same main misconfigurations. Weak password policies, and this is this is statistically true. These are the most common misconfigurations that I see. Not enabling MFA or like not hardware or software, just having a single sign, a single password, single factor. Excessive permissions and roles either to human or machine entities. And this one's a little more, I'd say, I don't want to say niche, but not as common, but definitely enough to warrant bringing up, but improperly validating tokens or tokens being given, or let's say not removing access tokens as well. heard my fair share of, oh, we haven't removed access token because someone, this server might need to access that again. Instead of, we'll give it another pair of tokens, even though it's been 8 months since we haven't used it.
Awesome. Awesome.
Right.
What about, like, you talked about weak password policies? What if a password is a strong password but it is leaked? What about breach passwords?
So for breached passwords, there are services online in which you can test, and I'm sure if anyone here has used a modern browser, I'm sure you've probably gotten this warning before of oh, this password has been seen in a data leak. There are services out there that weren't, and it's slipping my mind right now. There in the Cognito, there's a sub-service that can check whether certain passwords have been seen in a data leak. But in general, I always tried and true. It's that one XKCD comic where to bypass the dictionary attacks, just having a short sentence with some characters switched out for words, something that rhymes, something that you know with a common first name. Those are the best passwords. And it's that my default is, hey, you got 15 characters. That's 3 words right there with like an exclamation mark for an I or a 0 for an O, something like that.
I see. I see. As I've told, there is something called compromise credentials detection for Cognito, and people, they can
Yes.
enable that. And also, we would suggest to use passphrases instead of passwords, because they're hard to beat actually.
Yes.
And we can mention other stuff such as lack of email phone verification. We can require users to verify their identity. Also, uh, I mean, insufficient OAuth scope control, but that's great. And as you told, lack of MFA. I've seen that a lot actually, especially with regular users. But I believe we have an ASVS item that it says that we should enforce admin users to enable MFA.
Right. Yeah, I remember that. I can't remember the number of it.
Yeah, exactly. And for sure, also you should pass the token over HTTPS. And the other question is that how does AWS Cognito's approach to password policies and multi-factor authentication compare to other identity providers? And what additional steps might be necessary to meet the security requirements?
I would say Cognito offers strong support for customizable password policies, similar to other providers that are also security competency partners of AWS, such as Okta or Auth0. It integrates very easily with other AWS security services. As for some additional steps, I'll give a couple, and I actually want to pass that over to Farshad as well to see what some things that Fort Security might keep in mind. I'd say passphrases, number one, over passwords, not using the word password as a password, requiring some form of MFA for all users, and then demanding hardware MFA for anyone with some form of administrative access, especially the root account. But even if it's just two with a password and a hardware token, that a hardware like a UFI device or a YubiKey or anything like that, I would very strongly recommend that for anyone that has administration access. And then just email or text is just fine for non-administration access. And I would say I didn't mention brute force attacks, but we have WAF, the web application firewall, for any sort of brute force attacks as well. I'm going to pass this a bit to Farshad. I want to hear
I
forward.
think I think you've covered it pretty well there. The only thing I can add is what you said. I just want to like echo that again, is the passphrase over password, right? So recently NIST has upgraded their guidelines. I can't remember the name of is it 863B? It's one of those ones that was related to authentication, and they're saying that gotta go with passphrases. So, I think in the past it was like, hey, yeah, I mean, it's nice if you do that, but I think now that stance is pretty solid. So something for people out there to keep in mind, right? Because you want something that, the whole password complexity thing doesn't work, because what ends up happening is people use character substitutions that attackers know as well, right? So you're like, I'm going to substitute the letter A with the at symbol, or I'm going to use a 4 for an A, or et cetera, et cetera. But they know the same substitution. So enforcing that in uppercase, lowercase, that kind of stuff just isn't great practice. It's better to have long passphrases. So that's all I want to add. But maybe we can go to the next topic on that note.
Yeah, yeah. The next topic is AWS WAF. And my question is that how effective is AWS WAF in mitigating OS top 10 vulnerabilities? And what additional security measures should organizations consider implementing alongside WAF actually?
So now I apologize, I do forget all of the top 10 ones, but I can tell you that WAF provides rule sets to address some of the common vulnerabilities like SQL injections. I did hear one person refer to it as squirrel injections once. So if I pronounce it squirrel by accident, it's just that stuck in my head. And then cross-site scripting as well. Some additional security measures would be AWS Shield for DDoS protection. Similarly, down to making sure least privilege access to begin with. CloudTrail for logging, and AWS Guard Duty for threat detection, real-time threat detection. You can also use config for compliance checks as well.
Awesome. Awesome. Based on what I see, it is effective for some categories, very effective, such as injection category. I wouldn't say it's effective for broken authentication, maybe even broken authentication, but broken access control, I wouldn't believe that WAF can do anything because it requires to know the context actually.
Yes,
And
I think you're right on that. It doesn't cover all the top 10. I do know specifically with SQL, well, that mainly because it was on the security professional certification, but SQL injection and cross-site scripting, absolutely, WAF is good for that.
yeah, yeah. Also, like security misconfiguration, this is something. And in security serialization, we can bypass WAF for that specific item actually. And I mean,
I think for things that like our basic pattern matching, which detecting SQL injection could be one of those, it works well. Or cross-site scripting, hey, it looks for certain patterns, finds those in there in the payload, and then alerts it. But one question I have that this came up in conversation the other day, if someone is looking to do API rate limiting, should they look at using WAF or should they look at like an API gateway type solution?
Actually, let's think. I would say if someone is API rate limiting, API gateway would be the better solution. Now that I think about it, API gateway does have built-in capabilities for throttling limits and quotas at the API level. WAF is not. WAF can absolutely help with rate limiting. I would say it's more suited for filtering and blocking of traffic. So my answer would be API gateway in that sense.
Primarily, but if they just want to use one thing, they could do like a poor man's version with WAF, but
Yeah, jack
really
of all
for
trades.
route and path and all that stuff, you bet it. Okay.
Absolutely doable, but if there are some compliance checks that's required, then you would end up using API gateway to meet all of that.
okay,
Excellent.
awesome. Awesome. That's great. I mean, there are some security measures, but our time is limited, such as we should use CSP and other stuff. But let's go for the other question. Can you discuss the pros and cons of using AWS WAF's managed rules versus creating custom rules? Also, how does this choice impact an organization's overall security posture?
So honestly, this answer is a bit easy. For some of the pros of using WAF is it's quick to implement. The most common threats are covered. It's maintained by AWS itself, good for generalized security. Get up and running as quickly as possible. If you use WAF for the basics, you won't go wrong. It is less tailored than partner solutions or other AWS security services to specific use cases or also I'll mention this unique application logic as well. I would say for impact on security posture, there should be a combination of rules with managing with custom rules, as opposed to more use case or more niche/use case configurations. There needs to be a healthy balance. But most of the time, I'd say when you're first starting, use WAF, get to the basics, and then when you need to tailor to specific either compliance configurations, if you're using FedRAMP or in Texas, TexRAMP, or HIPAA regulations, GDPR in the EU, so on and I forgot the one in Greater Asia. There needs to be a balance, but for starting out, WAF is the best.
But the question was more toward like AWS WAF managed rules versus custom rules. Like
Oh, sorry. When I was saying WAF, apologies, but when I was saying for generalized, it would be uh
Okay, manage. You meant
managed rules.
manage rules. Okay.
Yeah, apologies. Managed rules for getting up and running, custom rules for once you're
Yeah.
line, moving on from there.
Yeah, for sure. Custom rules can be tailored to specific application needs, actually.
Like at the end, solve
Uh,
balance, right?
yeah. And the next question is that what strategies can security teams employ to minimize false positives and negatives when using AWS WAF, particularly in high traffic environments?
So I would say first, similar to the last question, you would start with a baseline of managed rules and then monitor closely in I think it's a count mode before enforcing any blocks, seeing what the actual traffic is, especially in a high traffic environment, trying to catch some trends using CloudTrail, um, CloudWatch to monitor for anything in real time for real time monitoring, CloudTrail to check after the fact. And then once you're starting to get the trends, once you're starting to see traffic patterns, then you can start fine-tuning custom rules based on those patterns specific to your application. And this is not a one-time thing. This is absolutely, if there are any changes to an organization, then you can monitor this over time and definitely make any tailored changes as needed. I, yeah, I that's a good encompass of that.
Awesome. Awesome.
Yeah, I
The
agree.
next question that I have, Fasha, do you have anything to say?
I was just going to add, like and one of the challenges with tools like the WAF is that they're working based on rules, right? So this hence false positives, and that's historically with tools that are like IDS, which is this similar tool but a different layer. The false positive has been a challenge. So dealing with that and making sure that the rules are as effective as possible would be really important to the success. So making sure that you're just not flooded by a lot of false positives that are clouding the view of the people that are analyzing that information.
Yes.
Awesome. Yeah. And Zaib, you wanted to talk about something. Sorry for cut you off.
No, I mean, all I said was yes, that's right.
Oh, I see. Okay. And the next question is that how does AWS WAF integration with other AWS services like CloudFront and application load balancer affect the overall security architecture? And what are some best practices for configuring these integrations?
So as for how they integrate, it's seamlessly. WAF works seamlessly with CloudFront and ALB application load balancer, providing a distributed layer of protection. CloudFront essentially handles all the global traffic with within the edge network, and then WAF will filter out the malicious requests towards applications, and the application load balancer will take all the actual proper requests and distribute them properly. As for some best practices, I would say use WAF with CloudFront for DDoS protection and global scalability. You can layer security with application load balancer by having security groups and NACLs, network access control lists, and apply any WAF rules close to the application edge for faster response times.
Okay. Thank you, Zohaib, for joining us. And that concludes this episode of AppSec Insiders Podcast. We hope that you have enjoyed learning about AWS security now that we have looked at some foundational services. For our next session, we are going to talk about relatively new services such as AWS Detective. And remember to tune in next time as we delve deeper into the world of application and cloud security and explore new ways to protect our digital assets. We appreciate your support and engagement. And if you have any topics in your mind, please don't hesitate to reach us. And our email is appsecinsiders@forwardsecurity.com. Our Twitter handle is FWD_SEC. Or feel free to follow Forward Security on LinkedIn. And please consider subscribing to our podcast. Have a good one.
Thanks, everybody.